Hi, this is Maury Moreland Morrison, here to tell you Geico has more than just great savings. Much more. Yes, while Geico could help you rack up more moolah faster than you can say metamorphosis, they've also been the fastest growing auto insurer for more than 10 years. That's more like it. Furthermore, Geico has fast and friendly claim service. That might seem like an oxymoron, but it's not. All the more reason to say no other auto insurer has more than Geico. Geico. Expect great savings and a whole lot more.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Source Material. This evening, we have a special guest, and we're doing a special episode. This evening, of course, we are discussing Kraven's Last Hunt. Great Spider-Man story, as suggested by one Benjamin J. Colon, who is my guest tonight. Benjamin, how you doing tonight, man?
I am doing just fine.
Fine and dandy?
Oh, yeah.
Ready to talk some Spider-Man? You just told me that this is the 30th anniversary of this story, 1987. So right. a lot of people talking about it.
We've talked about doing this comic for a while. It just it seemed like the best time to do it for a couple of reasons. Like
they celebrated this at East Coast Comic
Con in New Jersey, in Secaucus, New Jersey, which I've been an exhibitor at for the past couple of years. It's a really, really great show. I always have a good time when I go there. I had a chance, my buddy let me duck out for about 45 minutes to catch the panel. They did a 30th anniversary panel discussion of Kraven's Last Hunt, and what I actually found out, they brought pretty much the entire creative team together. They brought, J.M. DeMatteis, writer, Mike Zeck, penciler, Bob McLeod, inker, even Rick Parker, who was the letterer on the comic, and Jim Salicrup, who was the editor of I think all the Spider-Man comics at the time. It was they were actually kind of surprised because they said it had actually been the first time ever that all five of them were in the same place at the same time in person.
Oh, wow.
Comics being a medium where most people work from home, you don't necessarily get to meet your collaborators face to face all the time or all that often. So it was, I guess, kind of a unique experience for them. And these are all people that, whether they work closely together or not, they've been kind of friends and colleagues for, maybe well over 30 years in some cases.
What a momentous event, man. That had to have been something. And actually, to have them pull together everybody and put a panel on specifically about this 6-part saga. Well, let's go ahead. We'll get into the book. Yeah, we've already kind of talked about the creative team, J.M. DeMatteis and Mike Zeck, which, hey, come to think of it, I have myself a signed copy of a Punisher issue by Mike Zeck. I wonder who hooked me up with that.
You do. Yeah, some guy.
Some dude. Yeah, Mike Zeck, oh, man, let me tell you, the art on this book is phenomenal. I really do enjoy his work on here, much more than I did actually on the Punisher books that he did. You could tell that those were both around the same time. Was the Punisher miniseries 85? That's my first ever podcast I ever did on here. So you think I would know, but
86, I think Wikipedia is telling me 86. So
86. Okay, so it was right before these, right before this is. Yeah, you could tell he's getting better in this book. Let's talk about Kraven real quick. He's clearly the focal point of our story. Can you do your best and kind of give us an idea who Kraven is? Is his first name or his last name's Kravinoff, right?
Kravinoff, Sergei Kravinoff. They get into the a little bit meatier detail of Kraven's backstory and his heritage, but basically he's just sort of the the child of Russian aristocrats and sort of displaced Russian aristocrats who sort of tried his hand at big game hunting. And in the original page, he's one of the very, very first Spider-Man villains back in the 60s and the Ditko years, and he always was presented as this big game hunter who saw Spider-Man as sort of the ultimate prey. And over the years, I don't think anybody, until this story, I'm not sure if many writers and artists really took him all that terribly seriously post Stan and Steve years. Mm-hmm. There's a couple of Ditko issues that people know Kraven for, and then there's this. And I think even DeMatteis was not, and I know you have some info about the origins of this particular story. DeMatteis was not even necessarily sold on making Kraven the villain in this story until he happened upon the realization that Kraven is Russian, and DeMatteis is a big fan of Dostoevsky and sort of these working class versus aristocracy type Russian tragedies and these big Russian epic stories. I guess that in that way he was able to identify with Kraven, and he was able to put a new spin on him that nobody else had. And it doesn't betray any of the character that Stanley and Steve Ditko introduced. He's still a hunter. He's still preoccupied with his honor. He's still, borderline obsessive. They just kind of take that into the sort of grim and gritty 80s, and then, that's the story kind of does what it does.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I saw that was interesting on there was that I think DeMatteis took this concept of this story to DC and pitched it as a kind of like a Batman Joker deal. And then I believe he said the other one that he pitched was a similar story involving Wonder Man and Grim Reaper. Both, of course, were turned down, and until finally they accepted. And I think they kind of honed it a little bit after he brought this back up and said, okay, well, let's do it with, I don't know if he came to them and said, okay, I want, I imagine he did with Kraven. He said, hey, I want Kraven involved and Spider-Man involved. And they're like, okay, well, let's go ahead and tie a few other things into it. Some other things that I recall or read off my notes here. Let's see. Oh, yeah, that Vermin, who is going to be a character in here. We'll talk about him just real quick. But I saw where they said J.M. DeMatteis and Mike Zeck both created that character, which is pretty interesting.
I don't know how much info you have about that. I know J.M. DeMatteis, before Spider-Man, he actually had a fairly memorable run on Captain America. And Vermin was a character that debuted in Captain America and Captain America 272, according to my notes.
Nice.
Which was a Spider-Man team-up issue. So Vermin, his origin, to go really briefly, and he's basically a mutated creature created by Baron Zemo, who's mutated into this sort of half man, half rat creature that has sort of this regressed, emotional state of, almost like a child, but he's also this really animalistic, almost cannibal, which is another thing that this story pulls absolutely no punches on.
Yeah.
And when it comes to Vermin basically abducting people off the streets and pulling them into the sewer to become his prey. This is an overused term, I guess, but, it applies when I say, this ain't your daddy, Spider-Man.
Yeah, has some control over rats, I assume, because we see him, he has some type of power. This picture we brought up here has him, kneeling down and a bunch of rats clinging to him. So, yeah, he's a scary looking dude.
And between the art and between, of course, like Mike Zeck, the way he draws him and the way DeMatteis describes him, they go a long way towards making him seem just completely repulsive. Like just everybody's, terrified and disgusted of him, and very often both at the same time. You'll get that one minute and then they'll do something completely different, and, in the next minute that'll make you completely sympathize with him.
Yeah, yep.
He's probably the most sympathetic character. I know it's funny to say that, given that this is a story where Spider-Man gets buried alive for a week. But he's kind of, in this whole freak show that's going on, he's one of the most innocent characters, in the middle of it. He's kind of stuck in between these two guys that are kind of at war with each other. and he was turned into a monster. He was an innocent guy that was turned into a monster, and now he's kind of stuck in this situation. And they do a good job towards 1 minute making you think he's a monster, and the next minute making you think he's the most pitiable thing you've ever seen.
Give me real quick to put in perspective where we're at in 1987 with Spider-Man and Mary Jane, because I think that it plays into the story a little bit, not a whole lot, but I think it's important that our readers know where at in their history they are.
I do know where you're going with this, and if you ask J.M. DeMatteis, and a couple of people in the panel did, it's very, very important, actually, that this story takes place timeline-wise within the comic universe and in real life. This took place almost immediately after the marriage, after Spider-Man and Mary Jane got married. It may have been within a matter of months, if not less than that. J.M. DeMatteis kind of maintains that this is one of the best examples of a story that could not be told the same way if Peter and Mary Jane were not married. Mm-hmm. It would take a lot of the punch out of and a lot of the emotional drive, and we'll see that later on. A lot of the emotional drive out of the story if that were not the case, because that's a major driving force for Spider-Man, basically punching his way out of his own grave.
Yeah. It's clear and evident that they're newlyweds, and he is absolutely in love with her, and vice versa. It's always been like that, but now they're married. They have that tie, that knot. Tie the knot. They tie the knot. That tie that binds. So yeah, it's important that people understand this occurred very shortly after they got married. So all right, well, I'm going to go ahead and do my best here to summarize issues 1 and 2. You have anything else you'd like to bring up before we get into the first 2 issues of the book?
The version that I have actually has, I'm pretty sure this is Mike Zeck's pencil artwork for all of the covers. They have that as sort of a dividing line, which he was really that was something else in the panel that they mentioned, that as he went on and as you go on through the comic, it's at the beginning the pencils are a lot tighter, and it's much more of Zeck penciling and McCloud just kind of accentuating his work. Later on, he says he went a lot looser with the pencil artwork, and Bob McCloud actually filled in a lot of and got to fill in a lot more of his own style as the story went on.
Nice.
But you got 2 guys there that are both well known and incredible artists, each in their own right. So you put them together on a project, and it's that's a dream team.
It's going to be gold. Yeah, it's going to be gold. I'm going to briefly summarize issues 1 and 2, and then I might throw some questions in there. Okay, we open up and we can see Kraven the Hunter, who's clearly obsessed with Spider-Man. It's been a thing in the past, but right now that he has some kind of a desire to do something. It just seems like bad to Spider-Man here. Become the Spider. You see that a lot throughout the book. We're also shown Spider-Man, who recently has been thinking about the mortality of those around him and his own mortality. I think he mentions just shortly before this story, Ned Leeds, which was he the Hobgoblin?
Not exactly. At the time he was outed as the Hobgoblin, but that was never the intent of, the original team that was doing that story. Didn't get to finish it until much, much later. He was, later on they retconned it to where he was kind of set up as a Hobgoblin, but he wasn't really.
Oh, okay. All right, but he gets killed, right?
Yeah, in Spider-Man Wolverine, the very famous Spider-Man Wolverine comic. That's also something that took place in 1987, very, very close to around the time this comic came out. I think chronologically, it was that, then the wedding issues, and then this, all in the span of
wow.
4 months.
No kidding. So he's thinking about Ned Leeds getting killed. He's thinking about, of course, his Uncle Ben and himself. He's not, he just got married. Well, normally what a normal person would do after getting married is settling down. That's unfortunately not on the agenda for Spider-Man. I mean, with great power comes great responsibility, and it doesn't say that ends once you get married. That's been weighing on him a lot, and it just so happens that Kraven's decided to make his and Kraven does so. He goes on the hunt for Spider-Man. He finds Spider-Man. They get into a bit of a battle. He tranquilizes him. And then at the end of issue 1, we're actually led to believe that Kraven shot Spider-Man with a rifle. And as Kraven and a few of his thugs are having a service and lowering a black costumed, not moving Spider-Man into a grave. And then, of course, we have the iconic tombstone, "Here lies Spider-Man, slain by the hunter." And so, yeah, at the end of part 1, Spider-Man's dead. He's got Kraven won. Then we get to issue 2. And we're treated to our first appearance of Vermin here. He lives beneath the streets and the sewers. I mean, this guy, just like you said, he's vile. Just disgusting. But, he lives down in the sewers with his rats. He's this perfect man-beast combination created by Baron Zemo. And he's got this cannibalistic nature. And he traps this woman. Just like you said, we're pushing the code here. He traps this woman, and we know that Vermin's not got good things planned. And it's in issue 2 where they kind of they switch back, and then they switch and tell a little bit more of the story, and then they come back to Vermin, and there's rib cage laying on the ground. He's clearly ate her. I mean, yep, yeah, that's pretty powerful stuff. So as Vermin's sitting there, we know he's a pretty bad guy. In this second issue, Kraven's struggling inside himself. I mean, the Spider-Man has been beat. There's this war that he has going on where he has to now feel that he has to become the Spider. Very, what would you describe this as? I mean, is it honor bound, or how would you describe his drive to become what he's killed?
I believe the technical term is he's going crazy.
That's the truth.
There's a little bit more that's made of that as the story goes on. Kraven's always been kind of this, honor first, pure hunter type of character. And like I said, DeMatteis is just kind of taking it to an extreme in this story. It's a lot of showing as opposed to telling, which I love, by the writer and the artist, where something's wrong with him. He's crossed the line. Obviously he's crossed the line. And they do a lot of playing with the expectations of what about Kraven previously, even in the first issue where, Spider-Man's even kind of saying inside his head, he's trapped me in a net. He's probably just going to kidnap me and take me to his hideout. And he's going to monologue about his fiendish plans. And while he's doing that, it'll give me time to escape and, punch his face in. And then, I can get back home and get back to my life. And then that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen. And he, Kraven shoots him in the face instead, or whatever, or wherever he shoots him. So they do a lot of playing around with that kind of expectations. One, of what you think about Kraven, and 2, of what you think about supervillains and comic books in general, which once again is really great. I love when stories do stuff like that. So this all adds up to something's wrong with Kraven. Whether or not there's a couple of different explanations that you're given, that you're free to choose one or all of them as to why he's doing what he's doing. They go into later on talking about how he kind of matter-of-factly thinks about how they said my mother was insane.
Yes. That's mentioned at least 2 or 3 times throughout the book.
Right. The other thing is, he's consuming a lot of these liquids and substances, and once again, dodging, the Comics Code Authority like the Matrix. These are probably some pretty hardcore, psychedelic drugs, in between what they call it.
Yeah.
He's, dude's seeing colors and, tripping balls and, everything you can imagine at this point. And you'd figure he's been doing this for a long time, and maybe it's kind of finally catching up with him, because that's also how he, he has sort of the enhanced human powers that he has. Also, supposedly, it kind of extends his lifespan a little bit.
What really made me, and this is a theme throughout the book, you really dive deep into the people's heads here. We dive into Kraven's head. We dive into Peter Parker's head here in a few issues. And at some point, I'm sitting there going, okay, what I'm seeing, is it actually real? Specifically, I started questioning that as soon as Kraven was chest deep in spiders and decided to start eating them. Now, one of two things is I believe that part's real. And the second part is that clearly this man has gone over the edge. If he's just gulping spiders down, becoming the spider, he's got to ingest them. I mean, dude, I think that happens in this first issue. I mean, that's like second page in.
Yeah, he's seeing these, spider constructs and all of these, freakish, things.
That was one of the notes I had here. They are really playing up his insanity right here in this first issue. And at least that's the vibe I get for sure. And I think that's what they're trying to portray. Now, with Spider-Man dead, Kraven decides, okay, like I said, he wants to become the Spider. So he decides to don the black costume and become Spider-Man. One of the things I got to ask you, and you tell me if you have any insight on this. If not, don't worry about it. There's a couple instances in the second issue where there's red text boxes. Like, Spider-Man or Kraven will be saying something, and then, not saying something. He'll be thinking something. It's an inner monologue, and then all of a sudden you have like this one word red text box. And are they just trying to get across the war here between the person and the insanity, or because that actually happens in, I think, Spider-Man's monologue later on down, inner monologue. But
no, that's pretty much how I read it as well. Not only does that happen with actually most of the characters that have, thought, text boxes in this story, but pretty much any story that DeMatteis writes, he pretty much writes inner monologue in that way, as multiple different voices kind of arguing with each other within somebody's head, which works really well, especially with Kraven, where he's losing his damn mind and he's got all this conflict going, and he's kind of struggling with it a little bit, because you see like every once in a while he's going back and forth. Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? But he keeps doing it. So you get the feeling like he kind of knows that what he's doing is insane, but that part of him is kind of drowned out by the part that's actually doing it. Spider-Man has kind of a similar thing where, especially later on, we'll see like when, we'll get to it in a minute, but he's kind of struggling and conflicting with himself as, I want to do this, but I'm scared, but, I have to do this, but I don't know if I want to, and I don't know if I can, and I don't know what's going to happen. And, I was just, buried alive, and we'll get there. Man, it's something to put yourself in Peter Parker's shoes when we at that time, and just to imagine waking up to something like that. But yeah, like you said, we'll get to it here. So Vermin comes out of the sewers. That was my next bit of note here, is where Vermin decides, you know what? I'm still hungry, and he now is on the loose, New York City, and he's hungry. So who's his next victim going to be? I think he may find this lady. I can't remember if he finds the lady here, but we know that he's out there, and the threat is real, as Megadeth would say. Our hero Spider-Man at the end of issue 2. Still in his grave, and they do a great job of reminding you that right at the end, and throughout these issues, you just see that still gravestone as rain pours down upon it, and you're just hoping, you're waiting. Is our hero coming back? Who knows? Well, so there's a pretty good amount of action in this, despite Spider-Man basically not being in this issue at all, unless you really count, the tombstone. He's not in this issue. Yeah. And they make up for it by having a ton of action and a ton of craziness going on between, Vermin taking victims, and then Kraven's kind of quest to become Spider-Man and become a better Spider-Man than the original, which I know you wanted to talk about too. Yeah, he shows up at the end of issue 2. Kraven is going around dressed up as Spider-Man. He finds Mary Jane, who's about to be accosted by some jerk jocks, I guess we'll put that up. Yeah, some pros. So she's about to be accosted, and here comes black costume. Here comes the signature black costume, and as she's about to, face her end, Kraven just kicks 7 shades of shit out of him.
He does, dude. And she watches this happen, and she immediately realizes, oh shit, that is not Peter Parker. That's not Peter.
She knows right away, which is great. That's another great little character bit that, says a lot without saying a lot. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. I mean, Spider-Man, he would go around. He's not running dudes' faces into walls that unless he has to. He's not going to do that. Mary Jane knew that he had these two jerks outclassed as soon as he landed his feet on the ground. And then, of course, Kraven takes just a little bit further than what she expected Peter Parker to do, and that's when she knew for sure.
Towards the end of this issue, Kraven is really like hallucinating like crazy, and he's really
like there's a huge
giving in to
the huge spider that's made of spiders, and he is just at war with himself, trying to, I don't know. I mean, I've not been, I guess I should say I've been there where there's something that I need to overcome, something that I have to do. And no matter what, it completely vexes me, but I'm going to do my best to try and beat whatever that is and try to overcome it. And the sooner I do that, the less fear I'll have of it. Now, Kraven's inner war with his, I guess that's what we're privy to here, is his inner fight and always being beaten by Spider-Man. He needs to overcome that I don't want to say fear, because I really don't get a sense of fear from Kraven at all. But I know that there's something that he feels he has to beat that Spider-Man has. He keeps referring to the spider, like there's this spirit inside of Peter Parker that he must best. At first, the first thing he has to do is overcome his own fears in order to try and do that with Peter Parker. Am I far off? What do you think?
I'm pretty close to that sort of thinking too. The closest thing I can think of that this kind of reminds me of, and once again, because I do this in almost every show I appear in, but I'd give a shout out to Robert Winfrey, and I will usually make a Hannibal Lecter reference in some way. But if you've ever read or you've ever seen Red Dragon, the character Francis Dollarhide in Red Dragon is sort of obsessed and preoccupied with this idea of becoming, and the idea that he's going to ascend to like a higher plane, or he's going to become a more first of all become a more complete person, and then transcend that and become more than a person and become more than a man, and conquer humanity and conquer death and conquer everything, and become almost godlike. And it seems like there's a little bit of that in here in what Kraven's trying to do. He feels like he has to not only overcome the man who was always beating him, but symbolically and like we saw, literally bury him, then become him, then surpass him.
Yeah.
And he'll be, then he'll be something more, like that.
All right, well, let's go ahead. We'll hop into issue 4 here, which, let me see here. Is this, make sure I get not issue 4, issue 3, part 3. Yes, part 3. Let me open this up here.
More or less where we left off with Kraven killing criminals.
Yeah, I mean, he's still dressed as Spider-Man. He's in the black costume, going out there, continuing to take care of business. But now what the problem is that Spider-Man has a bit of a reputation in the city in New York City, and while it's not good, I'm sure that not too many people report about the fact that a Spider-Man killed a guy last night. That's not really going to happen a whole lot. Well, now that Kraven is out there in the black costume, I think at the beginning here, he comes across some thieves. He lays them all out. The police come and investigate, and they find out that, one of them is dead. So now the papers are reporting that Spider-Man has become way more violent. I think one of the headlines is Spider-Man goes berserk. So and what they're seeing is a Spider-Man that's let loose on the criminal underground. But of course, we all know it's Kraven dressed up as him. We also are shown Vermin, who attacks yet another victim. The police arrive, and he ends up attacking the police. And it doesn't go well for them either. I think he calls some rats up to eviscerate one of them, and he almost kills. There was a lady police officer, almost kills her. So again, Vermin's on the loose, and things are getting worse. People are getting eaten. People are getting attacked by rats. Kraven ends up finding Vermin and actually capturing him. Again, it's important to remember, Kraven is still dressed up as Spider-Man. And as you mentioned before, Kraven has had his run-in, or not Kraven, but Vermin has had his run-in with Spider-Man and Captain America. So they play on the fear that Vermin has. You mentioned the childlike qualities that this guy has. he was, he's kind of got this fear of spiders and Spider-Man. So because he doesn't want to get beaten again. But Kraven's jumped in. He's captured Vermin. So is that the end of Vermin on the streets? I don't know. We'll find out. Now, MJ, she grows a little bit more concerned as Peter has not come home. Plus, the papers are reporting that Spider-Man's practically, gone insane, gone Punisher. And what we close part 3 with what appears to be a black costume hand rising from the grave that Spider-Man was placed in. So that grave that we keep seeing up until now, that still grave, finally the loose earth is unraveling and a hand is coming up out of there. So what's going on? We got a zombie Spider-Man. I don't know. Stuff has gone crazy. And that's where issue 3 ends. Now, when we get to part 4, we are shown what's going on in Peter Parker's mind. Now, Peter Parker is still alive. At least we think he is. We're treated that white page where you're starting to wonder there at the beginning, like, oh man, is he in heaven? This doesn't look so great. But no, he's going through some stuff in his own mind. Now, remember, he was tranquilized and put in there. And he's having an inner conflict with himself as well. There's a lot of thoughts about death. He slowly comes to realize throughout this crazy mind trip that he's having that he's actually in a coffin buried alive. So I imagine his mind is trying to rationalize that as well. So we get this great sense of devotion, his devotion to his new wife, Mary Jane. I mean, throughout that whole period where he realizes that he's trapped, the one thing that's on his mind and that's driving him forward is to get back to his wife. And he also has that fear of dying and leaving her behind, which is, again, I think that's something that most spouses feel. You don't want to leave your newlywed wife behind. You don't want to leave your kids behind. You don't want to die. That's just the way it is. But crawling finally from the grave, he finds out that he's been in there for 2 freaking weeks. 2 weeks. And now he also finds out that Kraven has created this situation where, he drugged him, buried him alive, and then put his costume on and went out and basically sullied his name, was doing these horrendous things dressed as Spider-Man. So he finally makes it back to his apartment. Peter Parker finally makes it back to his apartment and, falls into the arms of his wife. And I assume, my guess is probably passes out because that's a bit of an ordeal. Now, as he wakes up, when he wakes up, he tells Mary Jane he has to go find Kraven. And here we are shown yet again in this issue, Peter Parker choosing his duty as Spider-Man over his wife. And it's not like Mary Jane looks at him and she's upset about it, but she understands. So at the end of issue 4, the final panel shows Spider-Man hanging behind a big grinning Kraven who throughout the issue kept saying he's out. He's coming. So he knew Spider-Man was on his way. So that's parts 3 and 4. Benjamin, I mean, we have a lot of stuff that happens in this issue, a lot of these 2 issues, a lot of stuff that deals with what Peter Parker had to go through. What do you got to say?
Going back to issue 3, first of all, we see the effects of Kraven just going all out in the Spider-Man costume and just brutalizing criminals, killing at least one of them, probably crippling or hospitalizing the rest. And he's taking no prisoners. He's going crazy in the streets with Spider-Man's identity. There's a lot, and then in issue 4 and then chapter 4, we see Spider-Man kind of struggling with himself. Some of the more more dreamlike or hallucinatory images. They say they basically say that whatever Kraven shot him with that tranquilized him probably also put him in some kind of psychedelic state where he was hallucinating in the grave, which that
can't be good, dude. I've heard plenty of stories of people talking about being put in solitary or just being in a dark room by yourself for a very long time. No other outside interaction, plus no noises other than your own breathing. You don't even need hallucinogens to start freaking out.
That alone will start doing things to your mind, in a long enough period of time. And like they said, he was buried alive for 2 weeks, and a lot is made of his struggle to get out. I talked to you earlier about if you're using any music on here, I suggested La Arena by Ennio Morricone, which you may not, anybody listening to this may not necessarily know that by name, but if I tell you that that's the music that was playing in Kill Bill Volume 2 when Uma Thurman punches her way out of the coffin, now go back and read that scene, read that issue again with that music in your head and tell me that it's not, like perfect.
Absolutely appropriate, yeah.
And it's a release because Peter's freaking out and he's having this hallucinogenic episode, and you're not sure what's going to happen and you're not sure how he's going to get out of it, but he claws his way out of his own grave, and when you finally see him pulling himself back up out of the grave, it's like this this big release of a moment where it's like, yes, he did it. It might have cost him his sanity, but he did it. What Mary Jane's doing throughout all of this and sort of the struggle that she's going through, because and this is a little detail that I don't think everybody, I don't think a lesser writer would necessarily get or necessarily jump on. But Mary Jane's whole thing with this is that Peter is missing, and you got to remember he's been missing for her. He's been missing from her for 2 weeks as well. She don't know what the hell happened and where Mary Jane has no idea what happened.
And some other dude's wearing his costume. I mean, You got to be freaking out, thinking, whoa, wait a second. Why is somebody else wearing his costume and doing these things?
But then the thing about that is she can't go to anybody. She can't call the police. She can't call anybody because she doesn't want to blow a secret identity. She's still kind of worried about that. She goes. There's a quick 2-page scene where she goes to visit Robbie Robertson, who's a supporting character that works in the Daily Bugle. One of my favorite non-superhero supporting characters. Spider-Man's always been really good when it comes to just regular people supporting cast. Robbie's one of the best examples of that. And he's, basically a friend to both of them. She still can't talk to him about what happened.
He does not know Peter Parker is Spider-Man, right?
Well, that's sort of a hotly debated topic of conversation between Spider-Man fans.
I can't remember if and it hits me I swear that he either knew or he had some idea.
It has been implied, heavily implied for a very long time that Robbie probably knows, but won't tell anybody.
Okay.
Never. I won't say it's never been said outright. Actually, apparently, I looked this up. Apparently, after Civil War, when Peter actually unmasked himself, which we'd all like to forget about.
Yeah.
Apparently, right after Civil War, actually, Robbie copped to the fact that yes, he did know. He did know. He had known for a long time. One more day probably undid all of that, so we're probably back at square one with that. Like so many other things that that undid so much character progression when it comes to Spider-Man. But that's a whole other story and a whole other episode that I may not necessarily even want to appear on because I'll never stop talking.
Well, okay, let's talk about I want to talk about a couple things here. I mean, give us your thoughts. Right now, I've got up the panel where he's crawling out of the grave. 1 page, full page. And the only words on there are "I love you." Do you got any thoughts as to his feelings for MJ at this point in time?
First of all, just as an artist, that's a beautiful page. I mean, I'd love to know who owns that page, actually. But once again, it says a whole lot without saying much of anything. You get it 99% in the body language where, he's kind of slumped backwards out of this hole in the ground and he's covered in mud. And it's at the same time, I could go on and on about this, but it's a show of incredible strength, but also just he looks completely exhausted. It took an incredible amount of strength and an incredible amount of superhuman strength to do what he did, and it probably took damn near everything out of him. And all of that is on the page. All of it shows through in the artwork. And his head is slumped to one side, and you can imagine, he probably can't even see straight. He probably, it's dark outside, and you probably still not be used to what little light there would likely be. Mm-hmm. All of that comes through in a page where there are no words uttered. There's a single line of internal monologue, and you can't see an actual face. And that's a damn good artist right there that can do that.
Yeah, very impressive. I can tell you that in my research, and you might have brought this up at the panel. Here we go. So the cover of Part 4, where, I mean, this is yet another tribute to what's going on. Now here he looks.
That's the one to have right there.
Yeah. What Zek had said, Mike Zek, he said that when they came up with the idea for this story, this was the cover that he knew he was going to do first. He said, if somebody came to you and said, oh, hey, okay, here's what we want you to do. We want our hero crawling out from his own grave. And Zek was like, yeah, I have no problem. And so he said that this was definitely the first cover that he did, and he based pretty much the rest of the covers all around it. You got anything you'd like to say about the cover for Part 4?
I'm not even sure what I could do, what I could add to any of that. I don't know what I could say that hasn't already been said about this. This is the iconic cover. This is the cover they stuck on the trade paperback, on most of the trade paperbacks. This is the one that everybody remembers.
Yeah,
and there's a good reason for that, because it's by far the best one.
Mm-hmm.
And you get a lot out of that. The image within the comic tells the story. Basically tells the same moment in two different ways. This cover and then the splash page on the inside. As is the nature of art and visual storytelling and all that great stuff. People will get different things out of it depending on what you're looking at and how you interpret things.
Mm-hmm.
But the page on the inside, to me, looks like exhaustion, and it looks like sort of triumphant exhaustion. This cover, he just looks pissed off.
He does, dude. I mean, he looks enraged. He looks like he's...
And both work.
Yeah,
both
they do.
Make sense for this story, because he's all of these things in this same story. In the course of this story, once he crawls up out of the grave and he's going through Kraven's house and he's looking for him. First, he's confused, and then he's shocked when he finds out how long he's been buried, and then he's furious and he's trashing Kraven's place. And he almost, he for a split second thinks about possibly killing his henchman, but he doesn't, and he pulls back, and then he just gets out of there, but then he has to go back because he's got to stop him. And all of these things are pretty natural reactions to events that this might have happened to somebody. At the same time, they're definitely very much in character with Peter, because he's always Peter's always that guy who's always been in conflict with himself, and we've talked about this before. He's at times really driven by his sense of guilt and his sense of honor and his sense of duty. All of that stuff comes into play. Add to that the fact that he's got to see his wife again. He's got to do whatever he can to see his wife again. And even though he does, and when he does, well, now it's about, now I got to go stop this guy.
Yeah, he gets back to her, and then after a night's sleep, he has a nightmare, wakes up, and he realizes, okay, something's got to be done, and I'm right now the only one that can do it. Even, dude, the guy. If you put yourself in Peter's shoes, I don't even know if he ate. I mean, the guy went home, fell in the arms of his wife, passed out, had a nightmare, woke back up, and he's like, I've got to take care of business. I've got to go back out there. It speaks to the drive of a hero, the heroic drive that this guy has. Another thing is that he's upset about what Kraven's done. I mean, Kraven is out there wearing his mask, doing these things in his name. It's not good, and it has to be stopped. Yeah, in that last panel where he's hanging upside down and Kraven's kind of looking at, out the corner of his eye, he's got his back turned, but he knows he's there. You're just waiting to see what's going to happen. You're waiting for Spider-Man to take Kraven's head off. Anything else you'd like to go into before we hit issue 5? We're stopping at the end of issue 5, and then we'll talk, and then we'll do issue 6 as a wrap up. But because issue 5 is, whoo boy,
where all hell breaks loose.
Yeah, buddy. Anything else you'd like to say before we move on?
I think I'm good.
All right, here we go. Issue 5, Thunder. It's about to be on. Spider-Man and Kraven, one room, 2-man enter, 1-man leave. Let's see what happens here. As Spider-Man confronts Kraven seems to have changed a little bit. As Spider-Man hits him square in the jaw, Kraven isn't even fighting back. He's almost reveling in the fact, and he tells Spider-Man this. He's like, look, I could have killed you. You would have been dead, but I allowed you to live. And I also took your place. And he's satisfied now. He feels that he is superior to Spider-Man. Now, Benjamin, I don't know if you caught what I figured out earlier today, and then in my research, somebody already had figured this out. But this is almost, granted, it's dark, but this is, I feel, superior Spider-Man, like that Doc Ock wanting to become Spider-Man and be a better Spider-Man. I almost really feel that in these issues. Am I wrong there?
No, I saw that, and I read this with that in mind, because I know I had some feelings of my own about that. And I read all of Superior Spider-Man, and some of it I liked, and some of it I didn't.
I was so mad, but go ahead.
Yeah. For those who don't know, real quick, Superior Spider-Man basically starts in right before Amazing Spider-Man 700, where it happens way before that. But certain events are put in motion where Dr. Octopus basically is able to switch minds, trade minds and bodies with Peter Parker. So where Peter dies in Doc Ock's body, which has, basically been ravaged by years of getting his ass kicked. Doc Ock basically takes over Peter's body, but also kind of retains some of Peter's memories. So it's kind of a, conflicted thing. And he decides also that he is going to become, a better Spider-Man than the original. Some of that is, altruistic, and some of that is just Ock being Ock and being a villain and thinking that, I can be better than you because I'm me and I can be better than you. It's funny because because in both cases, in Kraven's Last Hunt and in Superior Spider-Man, there's like a serious violation going on where Peter's body is like seriously violated. And in a way, in Superior Spider-Man, the violation that Octavius does to Peter is worse.
Yeah.
But the story is much lighter in tone. Mm-hmm. And some of that is a product of just the way that Dan Slott writes Spider-Man. It's also, drawn out for far longer. Superior Spider-Man went on for, I think, about 2 years.
Yeah, shoot, man. I think it was way longer than this 6-issue arc, which I didn't even see. I know it was 87, but I didn't even see when these issues released, because they released over the
3 months.
Was it 3 months?
Actually, no, it was 2 months.
I was going to say, we had Amazing, we had Web of, and we had Spectacular, I think, that had these, right?
Yeah, and they were all three, right on top of each other. I think they came out almost weekly.
Wow.
Over the course of 2 months.
So it was a lot more condensed and shot out there a lot quicker.
But I also think, like, Kraven's Last Hunt gives the violation that's done to Peter a lot more weight than Superior did in that shorter amount of time. And some of this is a product of storytelling in comics is a lot more decompressed, and things are stretched out for a lot longer these days, and everything is done with the trade in mind, and with several sometimes several volumes of the trade in mind. Whether one way of doing it is better than the other, I don't necessarily think you have to make a concrete decision about that. There's pros and cons for both of those types of storytelling. I've done both. I read both. I enjoy both. Also, Superior, the focus was a little bit different. This is Kraven's Last Hunt is very much focused on Peter's struggle throughout this story. Superior Spider-Man was all about seeing what makes Doc Ock tick, and that's fun too when you get inside the villain's head and you try to figure out what's going on there. There's some of that, of course. There's some of that here with Kraven and with Vermin and stuff like that. It's a little bit different when you make ostensibly a villain, like you're basically your main protagonist of an entire comic book series for 2 years. There's a lot of stuff you can do with that. Not everybody is comfortable necessarily with that happening. I know, because I have quite a few friends that absolutely hated Superior Spider-Man on general principle. I didn't hate it, but this story does what that story did better in a lot of ways, I think. Mm-hmm.
I think when it comes to Superior Spider-Man, what happened with me is I was so upset about the fact that they're like, okay, Peter Parker's dead. And now we get that in these issues, but you don't have... I mean, Peter Parker wasn't dead in Superior Spider-Man, but there was that thought that was going to happen. And you kind of get the same thing here. But I don't know if it's because it's so condensed that I'm clearly not upset about it. And by issue 3, Spider-Man's coming back. Imagine if Kraven would have killed him off for a year. And one of the things that they actually mentioned, I think it was in the wiki, was that they were not originally, when it was proposed, they weren't planning on putting it across the books. They had said that they were just wanting to do it, I think, in an amazing, possibly. And of course, editorial stepped in and said, well, wait a second, maybe it might not be a good idea to have this, possibly showing while Spider-Man is off doing other things in his other books.
Right.
So taking
that definitely came up in the panel too, where they
did it really? What did they say? Anything else or?
Not just that was the general gist of it. Like like I said, Jim Salicrup was the editor. He was on the panel, and he floated the idea of, well, this is such a heavy story, and it's such a a big event and a big thing that's happening to the protagonist, where you basically take him off the chessboard completely.
Yeah, you got to get him out of there.
And if you do that, then but then you have him doing other things and other issues, and maybe more lighthearted things and other issues. I guess they felt like it may take some of the emotional weight and some of the impact out of this main story, and they clearly saw this story as a really big deal even at the time.
Yeah.
Even at the time, they knew they had something with this, which is why they did it in the format that they did, which other story arcs that we've covered, because Maximum Carnage did this, had, copied that format of taking multiple titles, multiple different titles starring the same character, and running the same story through all of them over a much shorter period of time than it would be monthly in one single title.
That's got to be so stressful. I mean, I don't know if these guys plan a year ahead of time, but wow, just trying to put that all out there that quick across all those titles, and then just to see your I guess your idea and your creation come out and be over almost just like that. I mean, of course, as you said, Maximum Carnage, what was that, 14 parts?
14 part, I think, over what, like 3 months?
Yeah, dude, that's insane. That's insanity.
Yeah, I remember when it was coming out. It was pretty insane too, because you basically had to buy if you went once a month to the comic book store like I did. You had to buy four parts at a time.
Yeah, had to talk mom and dad. I need a little bit extra allowance here.
Granted, this was still when comics were under $2 a pop, so it wasn't as serious as it would be now that comic books are closer to $5 a pop.
Oh wow,
there's that.
Yeah, that's true. All right, well, let's go ahead. We'll get into the issue here. So yeah, Kraven. He's kind of waving it in Spider-Man's face and saying, look, I allowed you to live. I've took your place. I have no reason to fight you. I've bested you. Now, there's a question I have here. If you can help me with this, great. If not, I just didn't see a whole lot of it in the research. I didn't dig too deep, but Kraven keeps mentioning that his country and his parents were affected, or I think in this issue he says his country and his parents fell to the spider. Did Spider-Man do something with his family, or is he talking about something completely different, or is he just talking out of his head?
No, he's talking about communism.
Is he really?
Yeah. He probably doesn't say it specifically, but there's mention of like Lenin and stuff like that, and basically communism, by its nature, kind of does away with aristocracy and with a lot of, not all of, but without getting too much into that, but it kind of minimizes whatever, a lot of the class system and the idea of aristocrats and what wealth is and how wealth, affects people. And so he's basically from a wealthy family that fled to America because, communism was moving into Russia and changing the way that country dealt with wealth and with class.
Is he blaming Spider-Man or this essence of the spider for what happened? There's no tie there, is there at all?
Not directly, but it's it's actually a little bit like Eddie Brock. He doesn't necessarily have anyone to blame that deserves his blame, but
I see where you're going.
Here's this guy that's in front of me that keeps screwing with me, so I'm going to blame him for all my problems.
I see it. So what he's doing is is that, he sees Spider-Man as the representation. That's the word I'm looking for. The representation of this thing that's defeated his family and him over and over and over. And now, I guess, doing this, he's defeated Spider-Man and he feels at peace.
That's what I got out of it. That's pretty much how I felt about it.
Well, that helps me understand a little bit better, because I was thinking that Spider-Man went over to Russia and messed with Kraven and his parents. I seriously was at first. I was like, okay, if I kind
of want to read that story now, but
little too literal. Sorry about that. But yeah, okay. So at the beginning of the issue, we see that Vermin's trapped in an electric cage. Remember, Kraven trapped Vermin, or at least beat him, and then now apparently he's trapped and he's in this electric cage that Kraven put together. Now, as Kraven is clearly like, look, man, I have no more beef with you, he convinces Spider-Man to follow him downstairs. Kraven then releases Vermin from the trap and convinces Vermin to attack Spider-Man instead of being scared of him. So we get this fight between Vermin and Spider-Man. Vermin seems to almost get the upper hand. Now remember, Spider-Man and Captain America both had to team up in order to beat Vermin before. And that's mentioned here quite a bit. I think Vermin says it a lot. But they had to team up. So Vermin starts to get the upper hand, and he's about to hurt Spider-Man pretty bad when Kraven throws a knife, goes right into Vermin's hand. He looks at Vermin and he says, "No, you're done here. You've done your piece. You're free. Go." And Vermin's like, "Free?" And he's out the door. There he goes. Spider-Man's like, "No, you can't do this. You can't let this guy go." Kraven helps Spider-Man up, this beaten Spider-Man. Remember, just got out of the grave, just woke up from a nightmare, and then just got his ass whooped by Vermin. So he helps Spider-Man up, he takes him upstairs, and he says, "You're free to go as well." Spider-Man looks back, and off he goes, heads into the sewers after Vermin. I think he says something like, "We're not done here, or I'll be back," something like that.
Here's where things get crazy. Here's where things start to get crazy.
I guess it's a little late for getting crazy in this book, but Kraven is... he's kind of reminiscing about his family and about how he feels at peace. And now that he's become the Spider, he walks in to where there's been this coffin, this empty coffin in this room. And you don't know specifically what it was for.
There's one panel in here where it definitely looks like part of the top of the lid of this coffin has been broken off. So I'm wondering if that's the same coffin that he buried Spider-Man in, that he punched his way out of and then dug out of. That's my guess.
Yeah, you can see on that bottom left, it does look like it was. And as you're looking here, man, dude, he's looking at his family, and then you see the rifle sitting in the coffin, and he picks it up, and there is a sound of thunder. Remember, the name of this part was Thunder. I'm just going to go ahead and bring up the next panel, and he just picks the gun up, puts it in his mouth, pulls the trigger, and boom, Kraven blew his own brains out and fell backwards into an empty coffin. The next page I've got questions about. If it means anything, I don't know. Actually, we could probably talk about it right here, because down there on the right-hand side, he's focusing on his family. So, and of course, the last thing he says, "They said my mother was insane." And then boom. Benjamin, I give you the floor, sir.
Well, like I had said before, this was 87, and the Comics Code did not have as much a hold over the the content of the comics industry as it certainly as it did like in the 60s and 70s, where something like this would never ever have flown. You go back even to the early 70s was when Spider-Man had the other kind of Comics Code controversy that everybody knows about, which is, I think it's issues 86, 87, or 96, 97, 98. Which is that was Harry Osborn getting hooked on LSD.
Oh, that's right.
And they depict that, and they actually published those issues without the Comics Code seal, which was a huge no-no back in those days. Very controversial. They were really good, well-told stories that actually had a very positive, message against drug use.
Yeah.
But what my point is, even that kind of content was not Comics Code approved, during that time. And here, we have a little over 10 years later, and this is not overtly graphic, not as graphic as I guess it probably could have been. First of all, the idea that you're going to depict a suicide in a mainstream, Marvel comic at all, I think is something that was pretty gutsy for the time. Mm-hmm. And I'm not talking, and we're not, you see the page we're looking at right now. This is not like off, this is not entirely like off panel implied that so-and-so, killed themselves in some vague way that they don't have to describe. This is literally Kraven putting a gun in his mouth and blowing his head off. And you see enough to know exactly what happened. There is no kind of ambiguity. There's no gray area here.
Yeah.
You know by this page exactly what happened, and it's a really brutal, really as graphic as it needs to be, really, depiction of suicide. This is the other reason why this book is so remembered, is it takes a character that for most of his existence got treated like a joke, makes him deadly serious, makes him truly, a threat to the hero. And then in the same story, he ends his own life in the most, brutal way possible. It's a really gutsy, way to go about doing it. And I don't know the long-term, I have an idea of more of the long-term effects of, what this was and what this meant. Some of it, benefited from, like I said, this was the grim and gritty 80s. This was immediately post-Watchmen, post-Dark Knight, when comics started getting darker and started getting more violent. Mm-hmm. Like I also said, this was during that time when, before the 90s, before everybody missed the point of why these comics were good, this had something to say. This had something behind it besides just violence and just darkness. So this is this is one of the, when you talk about grim and gritty 80s, this was sort of ground zero for a lot of that. Kraven's Last Hunt sometimes gets included, but sometimes gets kind of regrettably left off of all of that, that 80s stuff that they say started a movement in comics, for better or for worse.
Let me ask you here real quick. Do you remember hearing about Kraven's Last Hunt, like after it got published at any point, or when was the first time you heard about it?
I have two sort of points of reference for Kraven's Last Hunt. One was the Spider-Man saga, which is, I think we might have talked about that before. Sometime in the 90s, it was this 4-part sort of retrospective of pretty much, I think, somewhere around the first 25 years of Spider-Man it had been at the time. I had, it covers Kraven's Last Hunt in some detail in that. Mm-hmm. So I was aware of it through that. And actually, my much bigger point of reference with the comic and with the story itself is actually the story that J.M. DeMatteis had done in Spectacular Spider-Man as sort of an immediate follow-up. It sort of bridged the gap between Kraven's Last Hunt and then the sort of 2-year long-form arc that he did in Spectacular Spider-Man with Sal Buscema that basically detailed, the return of Harry Osborn as the Green Goblin and his sort of rise and fall, which we've also talked about. That the first part of that sort of 2-year extended arc was called The Child Within, and it deals directly with sort of the aftermath of Kraven's Last Hunt. So I was aware of it from that point of view. So actually, it was a little bit like reading reading or watching the sequel to something before you've seen the original.
I can tell you that for me personally, I remember in 1987. I love to go on these little nostalgia thought trips here. 87, I think I was like 8 or 9 years old. I was enjoying every once in a while getting a hold of a Spider-Man comic. I think I was actually collecting Marvel Tales, the reprints. I think is that right? Was it Marvel Tales where they were reprinting?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was collecting that, like, I don't know, 5 or 6 issue run or something, just something to keep me reading. As shortly after they reprinted the first appearance of the Punisher, and the Punisher was going up against Moses Magnum. And I can't even remember much of the story other than just the characters. I wasn't really getting Web of, I wasn't getting Amazing. So I wasn't getting the main title that was coming out at that point in time. Matter of fact, I think, in all honesty, I may own 3 comics that I bought at the time the black costume was around at that time. time. In other words, I went back and collected some afterwards, but in the 80s, Black Costume Spider-Man, I wasn't reading, and I almost did not completely understand why in the world, what's going on here. So I did not hear much about Kraven's Hunt when it came out. Now, afterwards, the impact, probably a few years later, I remember a little bit of rumbling about the impact this story had. Kraven's suicide at the end of this book was it must have either been a hot topic at the time, which I'm sure it was, or I somehow heard about it from somebody who read and was really wowed by the story. Maybe it's been handled previously to this, but this particular story, was this the first time a character committed suicide in such a dramatic way in the pages of Kraven's Last Hunt, or was there other ones that came before this that you can recall?
Specifically to Spider-Man, probably not. I can't speak as to what the immediate reaction was at the time, the comic came out. This is not I'm not trying to, to elbow you or anything like that, but, I am a couple of years younger than you, so I was even younger than that in 1987.
Yeah.
I know I can make kind of an educated guess, just that this was still the impact and the influence that the Comics Code Authority had in 1987 was a lot less than what it had been, in previous decades. Even so, this book and its subject matter, and specifically leading up to what happens, pushed the envelope so hard, and it's made even more so by the fact that it's a Spider-Man story.
Yeah.
We touched on it a little bit. I know I mentioned Death of Jean DeWolf, which is written by Peter David, which, like I said, is another story that I want to cover at some point. It's another Black Costume story also, and it's a Daredevil team up. So.
Cool.
But, that stories like that were not the norm for Spider-Man. Spider-Man was usually, much more lighthearted and much more, all ages type of stuff. Peter David is not known specifically for, dark storytelling, but that was kind of an exception for Spider-Man and for himself as a writer. On the other hand, J.M. DeMatteis is kind of known as the dark Spider-Man story writer.
Oh, really?
Most of his stories are extremely kind of psychological and really kind of deal with Spider-Man's and Peter Parker's issues.
Yes.
And in a way that, in a way that actually makes sense. And like I said, with The Child Within, which is, like I said, is a follow-up to Kraven's Last Hunt, I think it came out in 1990, if I'm not mistaken, 90 or 91, right around that time. This was also during the time that, McFarlane got his own book, and he was doing, stuff like Torment, which is another fairly dark and more horror flavored story. But DeMatteis was in that follow-up story. He was, without outright saying it and without making it blatant, he was basically dealing with the possibility that Kraven's Last Hunt and the events of Kraven's Last Hunt basically gave Peter post-traumatic stress disorder.
Oh, wow.
Sort of him dealing with that and forcing him to deal with all the other things that you never think that Peter Parker would have to deal with, but when you really think about what the character's gone through in the span of, at that time, almost 30 years, you think it'd be a pretty psychologically messed up person.
Absolutely. He has dealt with some stuff. Did any of the panel members discuss, or did they talk about what influenced them to have him commit suicide? Did they have something like that happen in their personal lives, or was that anything that was discussed?
Not really. I think it wasn't touched on as much as I really thought it would have been, this part of the story. There was sort of a feeling that Kraven as a character had kind of run his course, and you really had done everything you possibly could with him, that there wasn't a whole lot outside of what Stan and Steve did with him in the first place that could be done, and that that this seemed like the logical end to to this particular character. J.M. DeMatteis also kind of has a reputation for killing off a lot of characters in Spider-Man.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Because he killed Kraven. Well, not all of them stuck. Actually, none of them stuck because eventually they did bring Kraven back.
I remember one of my notes here was that I actually did read Grim Hunt when it was coming out. And
I didn't read it, but I read synopsis of it, and it just sounded so stupid,
convoluted.
And I think that's a Joe Kelly story too, and I really like Joe Kelly, and I don't want to, I don't necessarily want to ruin that, but. Anyway, James Gunn has kind of a reputation for this period of time and for the period of time that he worked on Spider-Man, because he killed Kraven, he killed Harry Osborn, he eventually killed Aunt May. All of those things got undone eventually, but at the time, they all, first of all, he did them. Second of all, he did them in such a way that they actually felt like they meant something. All of those stories are some of my favorite Spider-Man stories, including my single favorite Spider-Man story, which is Harry Osborn's death in Spectacular Spider-Man 200.
The one thing that really, I think the most emotional panel in this whole story is the next page. I think it's the final page, I'm pretty sure, of this issue. It's this. I mean, as Kraven is coming to his decision to end it. I mean, it's not like it almost at the beginning of the story, this is already made up. His decision to kill himself has already been made. And one of the things that you see throughout, I don't know, I'm just going to go ahead and spoil this because it happens in the next issue. But throughout the issues, you see this guy digging a grave. And initially, you're thinking that this dude is out there digging this grave, and that's the one they put Spider-Man in. But as we go through issue 6, we find out that we see that guy continuing to dig the grave, and you're like, wait a second, that's already been done. Another great point of storytelling, by the way, where you're sitting there going, oh, wow, okay, why are we seeing this again? And then you realize that this guy has been digging Kraven's grave the whole time. Now, as to whether that guy has been out there before Kraven killed himself, to me, it really says, okay, hey, he had this planned. That's sad, number one. That's really sad. Number 2 is this picture that I've put on here. And I think it's the final page of issue 5. Throughout the issue, he's looking at his family. The family, his mom, like he said, was insane. What happened to his dad? Does dad get murdered or something? Or I can't remember what he was saying what happened to his dad. I remember he had mentioned some stuff happened to his dad. Either his dad became broken or destitute, something like that. I don't remember. But regardless, he's looking at this picture with him and his family, and he's as a kid in this picture, and he's smiling as his own blood drips down upon it. That is powerful because there is a lot of stuff that is going unsaid. There's no words on this page. The only thing you see is him smiling as a kid and then the blood dripping down the photo. A lot of what I take from that is, everybody's happy at one point. As a kid, I think you're happiest. You're with your parents. You don't have a whole lot of responsibilities. You certainly don't have a lot of things to worry about. You don't have some guy in a spider suit giving you a hard time when you go out, doing your own thing. But it's, you're at your happiest, and then something changes in your life. Whether it be, obviously, I think in Kraven's case, a mental illness that turns you into something where you're not happy. You're always worried. He's insane throughout this whole thing. He's got to overcome the spider. He's got to do this. He's got to do that. But even that, when he gets that done, he still ends his own life. I mean, the one thing that you come to complete, I guess, if somebody who wants to argue about this could say, well, he felt his life goal had been met, nothing else to live for. Boom.
And it's another thing that is kind of said without, spelling it out, where his whole thing was about, in this whole story, was about regaining his honor. And he did that. And that's really the only goal he seemed to have left. So when he achieved that, or when he felt like he achieved it, he did everything. He beat Spider-Man. He assumed his identity. He proved that he could do things that the original couldn't. And then he was done. And when he was done, he felt like there was nothing else left for him to do and nothing else left for him to prove. So he chose to end his life then and there. Some of that, of course, is the fact that he was not right in the head.
I was going to say, the reason why I asked if somebody on the panel had been touched by suicide or any of the creators, specifically if they had, and that's what drove them to do this with this character. A while back, it was more than a few years ago, I was working with somebody, and she ended up leaving early for the day. And the next day I found out that her grandfather had shot himself and killed himself. He was suffering from dementia. And there's a lot of times where I wonder if there are people out there that understand they're going through some type of a mental illness, don't have that running through their head. When I saw this panel and I saw this kid who was happy, and it struck me to think, well, is that why he took his life? Is it because he knew he was going insane? He knew he was at a point where he felt he could no longer function. He didn't want to get any worse. If he was going to continue this path and this insanity, does he need to end it? And he chose to do so. But, hey, when I told you I hadn't read it, you said you're going to love it. I was like, oh, okay, well, it's a Spider-Man story from the 80s. We'll see. And
I wish I could read this thing for the first time all over again.
Dude, impactful. It really is. It really is impactful. So, all right. Anything else that you'd like to say before we get into our wrap-up with issue 6? And, hey, Vermin's still on the loose. We got to get things taken care of there.
Well, like I said, and this keeps coming up, which is how they keep going back and forth with Vermin between him being a savage and him being repulsive to him being pretty sympathetic and almost innocent, in his own way. They keep balancing that back and forth. If Spider-Man is one extreme and Kraven is the other, then Vermin's kind of both sides.
That's a good point.
One.
I mean, that is a good point. I never thought about that because they specifically say in there that he's the man beast. I mean, he's a perfect hybrid of the two. Kraven even goes through and when before he meets his untimely end, when he realizes that there's not a beast behind the mask and the costume that is Spider-Man. There's just a man. And when he's helping him upstairs, he's like, he at that point realizes that, well, this is a pretty good guy. He's upset that he hasn't come to realize that Spider-Man or Peter Parker is actually a person.
I will also say, because if this was meant to be, to be a plot point, they would have brought it up. Something else that this. I wonder if this was also very much in the same way when this was intended to be a Batman Joker story. At no point does Kraven unmask Spider-Man. At no point does he try to figure out what his identity is. And I think it's, that's the old thing, even as recently as if you've read, Death of the Family in Batman recently, and Endgame and Batman, the Scott Snyder and Greg Pulo, which are the two most recent Joker stories that they did, and they make a really big issue and a big point of saying in those stories, Joker doesn't care Batman is under the mask. He does not have the slightest interest in that. And I kind of get that from this story too. Like Kraven has he has him completely unconscious and at his mercy before burying him in the ground. It could have been the easiest thing in the world for him to take his mask off and find out who he was, but he doesn't.
That's right.
I figure it's because he doesn't care, because who he is under the mask is completely irrelevant to Kraven. He's Spider-Man. He's the Spider, and that's all that matters. And all that matters, beyond that is that he beat him. And after that, it probably may not have even occurred to him if you think about it that way.
Yeah.
The other thing is, going back to Vermin, this is a little, my perspective with Vermin is a little bit different because, like I said, I read the follow-up story to this called The Child Within, and Vermin is a really big part in that story as kind of back and forth between being sympathetic and being, a monster in this story as he is, at times. In Child Within, he's extremely, extremely sympathetic, and you get all of his backstory, and you really feel, because he goes through so much, you find out what exactly Baron Zemo does to him.
Oh wow!
And he ends up actually kind of being the driving force behind that story, and it's a lot of it is about, Spider-Man trying to save him. And not exactly in the way that he does in this story. In this story, it's a little bit more superficial than that. In Child Within, it's really about, what Vermin goes through, not just after Zemo mutates him, but actually what he goes through before he ever met Zemo. And there's, like childhood trauma behind that I don't want to get too much into. I guess, if you've read this, try to find I don't know if it's collected in trade anywhere, but the original issues aren't too expensive. You can probably grab them all at a con.
Cool.
It's great stuff, and once you do that, you'll probably want to read the rest of DeMatteis's run on Spectacular Spider-Man.
Nice. All right. Well, so issue 6. It's pretty much Spider-Man versus Vermin here. Spider-Man's in the sewers. He's still dealing with the fact that he just a couple of days ago was buried alive for 2 weeks. You see a lot of struggle here. Imagine you're in a coffin for 2 weeks. Last place you want to go is back underground. But he's got to go stop Vermin. So as he's searching, he finally finds Vermin and he bests him. There's a couple times where it seems that he's actually going to get the better of Spider-Man, but Spider-Man, the rage that Spider-Man has at one point is pretty interesting, because I think he's got Vermin webbed down, and Vermin's about to say something or do something, and Spider-Man just straight up punches him in the face, and then he has that inner monologue again. I think it may even be those red boxes where he's like, "What am I doing? Why am I hitting this guy? I don't want to hurt him." So it's again showing you the rage that he has, but the humanity's coming through. That's what I think they're trying to get across here. As they're fighting, I think Vermin escapes, but he soon tricks Vermin into going up into the city, into the daylight, and he's able to capture him and turn him over to the police. I already talked about how the man was still digging the coffin here, and they placed Kraven in the grave, which is, a way of letting you know, like I said at the end, that Kraven may have had this planned out, or at least, he's definitely going down. He's going back into the same ground that Spider-Man just came from. So the only last thing I have to say in regards to these issues, because issue 6, I'm sure you'll have a little bit more to say about it, but I'll finish with the quote, and that is, "Spider, spider, burning bright in the forest of the night.
What immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry?"
There we go.
Which is basically a take on a poem by William Blake called "The Tiger." Instead of spider, spider, it's tiger, tiger. And it's, from what I read about the poem, it's not too much longer than those first few lines. But it's more or less about an artist trying to recreate the beauty of nature, in this case a tiger. It takes on kind of a different meaning in this story, because it pops up at the very end of the story, but you also see it towards the beginning, I think in the very first issue. In the context of what Kraven is trying to do, it's more about trying to capture Spider-Man specifically, and trying to capture the spider and his idea of what the spider is, and seeing that as beautiful and also terrifying, and also something that he has to do to become a complete person.
I'm thinking of Captain Ahab and Moby Dick.
Yeah, that's pretty good too. That works. And it had a similar kind of tragic end, but in that case, it was just more like you bite off more than you can chew, because your obsession kind of blinds you to the fact that maybe there is more in common with this than I thought. Yeah. Your obsession blinds you to the fact that you're basically locked into a path of self-destruction.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm smarter than I thought. Okay.
Well, what do you got to say about issue 6? This fight between Spider-Man and Vermin, and I think there's a lot of, again, Peter Parker trying to deal with the fact that he's got to put a stop to Vermin. Plus, he's got to get back home to MJ.
Yeah, and he's dealing with his own fear, and like I said, and even in this story, you see a little bit of kind of what you might call like PTSD kind of poking through, where he's clearly got some serious like claustrophobia issues, and who wouldn't given the circumstances he just found himself in. And in its own way, this is kind of Spider-Man at his best. This is where J.M. DeMatteis really shows himself to be a guy who's not only just a great writer in his own right, but somebody that really got Spider-Man and really got Peter Parker, in my opinion, because underneath all of this stuff and underneath all of this fear that he has, he's still going forward. And it's not all about going forward to, to go beat up on a monster. Not for Peter. For him specifically, it's one, to make sure that this monster doesn't hurt anybody else, but two, to also, recognize that, he's kind of this poor, pitiful creature, and he's got to try to help him, too, which you wouldn't necessarily get from every superhero. You wouldn't get that sort of sympathetic take on this. So mostly all the things that are driving Peter forward have nothing to do with him. I should say have more to do with him trying to help other people rather than, doing it for anything having to do with himself. If anything, he's fighting his own fears, and he's fighting his own kind of demons and his own kind of general fear and disgust of Vermin himself. Like I said, the comic goes a long way towards making Vermin pretty repulsive and pretty repellent, to the point where you can practically smell him through the page. And once again, it takes a hell of an artist to put that forward in a medium where you cannot hear or smell anything.
That's right.
All of that comes through, but there's also some rage there, like you said. At one point, what it is Vermin's threatening to kind of sick the rats on him, and Spider-Man kind of does the only thing he can in that situation, and that's punch Vermin in the face, and that's more to make him afraid than anything else. He didn't necessarily want to do it, and he tells him right after that, he's like, "I don't want to hurt you. I want to help you, but don't make me have to hurt you any more than I already have." And and Vermin's fighting it. He can't, he doesn't know what the hell's going on for the most part. He's alternately, like, at first he's trying to attack and then he's trying to escape, which is also going back to the whole animal thing. He's very much in fight or flight mode.
Mm-hmm. Clearly, the Spider-Man showing you the antithesis of what Kraven is. And what brings me to that thought is about how Kraven was just, he was completely enraged and focused on beating and becoming and destroying Spider-Man, which he did throughout up through these issues. And right here, you can see that Spider-Man is so mad that he wants to he has this repulsive thing in front of him, and the one thing he can think of is he's getting his butt kicked by him a couple times. And now he wants to do the same thing. He wants to sock this dude right in the mouth, which he does. He wants to break Vermin and tell him to keep his mouth shut. And then immediately, as soon as he does it, he realizes he shouldn't have, or at least he didn't want to. And he's not breaching that line that Kraven crossed probably a very long time ago. He's not crossing that line where he is wanting someone to be broken or to be, because Vermin's absolutely terrified of Spider-Man. And if it wasn't for Kraven kind of pushing him along, he wouldn't be. He would have ran as soon as he his feet hit the ground back at Kraven's house. Spider-Man has every opportunity here to become something similar to what Kraven was: focused, enraged, somebody who wants to beat someone else into submission and make them. But as soon as he realizes that Vermin is more a man, he also regains his own humanity and says, well, wait a second, I need to pull back. What am I doing here? I don't need to break this person. I don't need to impose my will upon this person, or I'm just going to be the same person I just fought earlier. So
one last thing, which is a lot of the major issues of, the story that we just saw kind of got tied up at the end, where when the cops show up to Kraven's house, and they find that, that he's dead, obviously. They also find that Kraven actually wrote a full confession, signed, complete with, photos of what he did to Spider-Man, and that, it was him in the costume, killing criminals and, brutalizing people. And it's a little bit neat, but I guess it's necessary because, otherwise you immediately would have to deal with the idea that, Spider-Man is going to be accused of being a murderer. And there's kind of no going back from that.
That's true.
They kind of deal with that. It's I'm not saying it's a bad conceit of the story. Like I said, it's wrapped up pretty tightly, and it makes sense with what Kraven was doing, what he was trying to do, where he had regained his honor. He already feels like he won. He didn't feel any need to sort of humiliate or complicate Spider-Man's life any further, I guess. So he pretty much confessed, and in a way, maybe he wanted people to know what he did and how he did it. And maybe there was some ego involved in that, if you want to look at it that way. That got wrapped up, and then you see like once the fight with Vermin kind of reaches the streets and comes out of the sewer, and once that happens, it all ends pretty quickly. You see as the sun's coming up, the morning edition of the Daily Bugle talks about Kraven's confession. Spider-Man probably doesn't know this just yet from where he's at, but Kraven just kind of saved his life.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. And the first thing he does, as soon as Vermin's put in the car, he heads back home. He heads back home to MJ, which, man, I'd hate to be MJ in that relationship. It would be really, really tough to have to worry about that. It doesn't end well.
Well, they also don't do they don't do her many favors by, just kind of having her stuck at home, kind of pining, worried, sick. There's been a lot made of that, and what could be done, and what writers and what artists portrayed her and how they portrayed her as the wife of a superhero. And opinions differ. This was one way of doing it. And like I said, DeMatteis at least gave the marriage some weight. And he was actually one of the few people during this period of time that actually tried to write that marriage as, realistic without being obnoxious.
Mm-hmm.
So,
any final thoughts as we wrap the book up? I want to bring up a picture of the panel, and I want to kind of talk a little bit about that. I want to put some names to faces. So we aren't just done yet, but I definitely want to get your final words on Kraven's Last Hunt, man.
Yeah, just that, I think just absolutely everybody who is certainly a fan of Spider-Man, and if you're a fan of Spider-Man, unless you're a very, very recent fan of Spider-Man, you probably already read this. If you're new, read it as soon as you can. If you're new to comics, read it as soon as you can. If you just want if you just want to read a good story with some really good artwork, read this as soon as you can. I've said I don't necessarily. A lot of people consider this to be the single best Spider-Man story of all time. I don't necessarily think so. It's up there. It's very, very much probably top 5, maybe even top 3 for me personally. It's close. Just it being as dark as it is, I have my ideas about what I consider to be a really great Spider-Man story. This has a lot of them. I consider certain other Spider-Man stories to have balanced out a few more things that I really love about the character that kind of put it above this one. Mm-hmm. But it's still really good. They really just got lightning in a bottle with this in just about every way. So yeah, absolutely. I can't recommend this story enough, and it's reasonably. It's one of the most more frequently reprinted stories, Spider-Man stories. I think during the panel, it was funny because I started following J.M. DeMatteis on Twitter, and I think during the panel he had said that there was a certain version of this story that had only been, I think, released in Italy that he had never been able to get his hands on. And I think just recently, and it's been about a month and a half since the convention. I think he actually tracked it down and finally got it.
A version of the story. What do you mean? It was just in Italian, or what's that mean?
I think it was a bigger version. I think it was a bigger size, and the artwork, the artwork was bigger. Okay. It may have had some additional material in it. It may have had Mike Zeck's pencil artwork done, shown a little bit more prominently. I don't remember the exact details. I know it was a very particular, a certain version of it that was apparently pretty rare.
Interesting. As for my final thoughts, I want to go ahead and I'm just going to quickly echo what you said for sure. Folks, listen to what Benjamin J. Colon is saying. It is a tremendous story. It's standalone too. You really don't need to know much about who Kraven the Hunter is, because what you need to know in the story is where he's at that point in time in his life, and that is shown. So I don't think you need a whole lot of much going into that story. So it's perfect just to pick up and read. I really don't think you need any idea as to the continuity as to what's going on here. The art in this book is tremendous. The storytelling is great. Do not hesitate to pick this up if you can get your hands on it. Either in individual issues, which I think are a tad, they're not cheap. They're a tad up there, but I know issue 5, of course, the death of any character in the Marvel universe usually is going to.
Sometimes, and I have seen this a few times. Sometimes you'll get lucky at a convention, and what they'll do is they will bundle all 6 parts together and sell it to you as a whole. Nice. If you can't get the trade, they'll put all of them together, and you can usually get the whole thing for between $20 and $30 if you're interested in the individual issues. I'm sure it depends on what convention and who's selling it to you, but I've seen that plenty of times before. And if not, the trade is always around, and it's reasonably priced.
All right, cool. I brought this up here. I don't know if you have it on your screen or not, but did you know that they did a prose novel of this?
I think I heard something about that. I don't know how recent that was. When did that come out?
2000. I know it's in the 2011, I think, or 2012. So it was within the last 10 years. They said there were a few other Marvel prose novels. I didn't get a chance to look, but I don't know who Neil Clade is, but I mean, shoot, dude, a freaking prose novel. That's pretty interesting. Is that something that happens a lot, where they'll take stories from comics and turn around and make them into actual novels?
I've seen it happen from time to time. I think I think you're right. They kind of made a thing of when this one came out. I think there was at least one other one. I can't remember for sure if it was Dark Phoenix Saga, or if that was one of the ones that got novelized a lot earlier.
Oh yeah,
longer ago. But I'm almost positive there was a novelization of X-Men Dark Phoenix Saga. Probably a few others. Maybe like Infinity Gauntlet. The big event ones, the ones that you would think that they would come out with any version that they could to get the story farther out there.
Yeah, I'm looking at. Is that just? Oh yeah, that's just DC. I just typed it in. I got a whole wiki in front of me. Now the thing is that it's not all based off of comics. It's got the characters in there, but I mean, you got things like let's see, The Secret of the Sinister Six, which my assumption is that that's a novelization of, maybe, I don't know. Let me take a look here. Oh, of course, you got your movie novelizations in there as well. Right. I'm trying to find the one we got where Spider-Man Requiem. Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to find the one that we were just looking at.
Oh, Man Without Fear. Okay, Man Without Fear got novelized.
Okay.
Just last year, apparently. They started doing more of these recently.
Yeah, right here, 2015, Marvel Superheroes, Secret Wars.
Secret War, yeah, I think we might be looking at the same wiki now.
That's crazy. Adapted.
Another Mike Zeck story, another Mike Zeck artwork.
That's right.
I like Zeck's artwork a little bit more in this story than Secret Wars, though. I don't know how many people that's going to upset. Which also it's worth mentioning, because they did mention this in the panel. Like, people tend to forget this, but Mike Zeck designed that black costume, that black Spider-Man costume.
Oh, that's right. That is right.
He, he is the one that's still credited as designing it. I guess McFarlane gets the credit for designing Venom and the specifics of what he looked like, but the actual costume and the design itself, Zeck also designed that, and they also said, and this is also true too, that's another thing where it just came at the right place at the right time, because they said that this particular story and a lot of the darker elements and a lot of more like horror elements of Kraven's Last Hunt might not have worked the same without that black costume. I think the costume kind of lent a lot to how the story was told. If you try to do, as much as I love the classic, red and blue Spider-Man costume, it might have felt a little out of place in the type of story they were telling. They go into that a little bit more, and they talked about that for a brief period of time in the panel as well. They really mentioned a lot about how everything just kind of lined up in the right place at the right time for the story to happen and to be made and to become what it was. I also remember, I think they were kind of half taking the piss out of Zeck a little bit when one of the ladies on the panel actually said that that he drew really, really nice naked dudes, and there were a lot of them in this. And there were a lot of them in this story.
Yeah, I can remember Kraven's definitely naked at one point when he's taking off the costume. That's funny.
So,
all right, help me out here. I brought up the picture with I think it's the one that you snapped. Holy moly! Hold on. There we go. Okay, so let's put some names to faces, if you remember.
From left to right, I really hope I'm getting this right, and if not, I apologize. From left to right, Bob McLeod, J.M. DeMattei definitely, then Mike Zeck, then letterer Rick Parker, and then all the way on the right end is Jim Salicrup.
And now you got another picture here that you had snapped, I think, where they were all standing together. I'll go ahead and bring that up here.
This was afterwards. Also, this is the best thing, and if you ever go to a convention, this is not unique to just what these guys were doing, but they usually sit them in front of these tables with these white coverings on them, and then they'll either have pens or markers or something or other laying around, or these guys being artists, they'll show up with their own and they'll start drawing on the table coverings. So by the end of this panel, and it wasn't like they weren't paying attention, but as somebody that has done this myself, I can it requires a lot of my attention to draw something significant. But if I'm just sketching and absently doodling something, I can do that and have a conversation. So that's what these guys are doing. So the whole that whole edge of the table was covered with little sketches and things.
That's awesome.
And of course, everybody was joking. It was like take a pair of scissors and cut that part out and throw it on eBay real quick.
Oh heck yeah, no kidding. I want to switch back here to your rendition of Spider-Man coming out of the grave, which is wonderful. You drew that actually on my birthday, believe it or not. So was that same week, or did you say it was a week after?
It was a week after that.
Okay, there we go. So you want to kind of go into what you did here? I mean, I don't care that this is an audio podcast. People want to look at the video. That's great. That way you can check out some of the awesome art that we talked about tonight, and especially Benjamin's rendition of Spider-Man coming out of the grave.
Wow.
What did you want to try and do here, man? I mean, were you trying to capture the same feel, obviously?
I guess, like I said, that image of Spider-Man coming out of the grave is so iconic and it's so well done. Like I didn't.
I see you went with the exhausted look, by the way.
Yeah, it almost feels like a cheat to do it at all, let alone to do it the same way that Mike Zeck did it, because there's no following that really, in my opinion. I just tried to go for something else. Like I tried to go for a different angle and different way of doing it than he did. In both images, both the cover and the interior splash page, he's kind of slumped backwards. His back is kind of slumped over that gravestone. In this case, I had him with his back turned, and he's kind of pulling himself up out of the ground, crawling up against the tombstone.
What's the medium you're using here? Is this just ink?
It's pencil first, then ink, and then there's a lot of whiteout in there actually for the rain.
That's what I was going to say. That was the part I was like, did you seriously have to go through and ink every little? So what you did was just straight black and then white out over it, right?
Yep.
Okay. Looks good. I mean, it looks tremendous. Even the splashes of the rain coming off of Spider-Man in the grave or in the tombstone look awesome. I
kept saying, like I said at the time when I drew this, when I posted it, I'm like, this is one of those sketches that I finished way too soon. Like, I had so much fun doing this that I just finished way too fast. I wanted it to be over, and then suddenly it was over. I'm like, God.
Well, it looks good, man.
I can briefly mention the whole Art of Spider-Man thing, which
I'd love to hear about it. If you got, dude, some of that stuff that you posted, like I said, when you posted the picture, I legitimately thought you had that page. I was like, holy shit.
I got the next best thing though. What Jesse's talking about is Here in New York City, we last week, as of the time of this recording, so that would be, it was actually June 9th was the opening night of in the Society of Illustrators, this gallery exhibit for the art of Spider-Man, and it was basically John Romita Sr. was actually the guest of honor. It was a lot of his original artwork on display, the most of his work that I've ever seen in one place. I was taking a lot of pictures, but I tried to take a lot of it in personally because, it's one of those things where, like, when the hell are you going to have a chance to do something like this ever again?
Yeah.
And it was not just his artwork. It was mostly his artwork. A lot of Gil Kane artwork, who was also just legendary Spider-Man artist. A lot of Ron Friends. They actually had his pencil artwork, I think copies of his pencil artwork from the kid who collects Spider-Man, and then a lot of his ink pages. I had pictures of that. I took a lot of pictures of that. Probably the one thing that I'm going to be talking about for a long, long time is they had some Steve Ditko artwork at the gallery, and if you're going to have any Steve Ditko artwork at all on display, it would have to be what they actually had, which was the 4-page sequence in Amazing Spider-Man 33 from 1965. That's the final chapter. For those of anybody who's an old school Spider-Man fan who knows the Ditko issues knows exactly the sequence that I'm talking about. And Spider-Man trapped under tons of rubble in a flooding chamber, that he, in this 4-page sequence, he's just basically hyping himself up to sort of go above and beyond his limits and just lift this tremendous weight literally off of his shoulders. And you get the great splash page when he finally does it. And to see to read that sequence from its original artwork, me as an artist, as a comic book artist, as a Spider-Man fan, that's some bucket list level stuff from me personally. That was a moment. Like I went with some of my very best friends, and we all had a good time there. But when it came time for me to go and look at those pages, I actually told them, I'm like, I just need a minute by myself quick to do this. And they totally understood. And that was great. I met John Romita Sr., who was always a tremendously classy guy, who was always happy to and very friendly to meet when it comes to meeting fans. And he signed, he did a little bit of signing, including my copy of Amazing Spider-Man 39, which is the very first issue of Amazing Spider-Man he ever drew. It's the Green Goblin issue where, he's flying away with Peter tied up on the cover.
Yeah.
And I gave him a green paint marker, and he said he was weirded out by it, but he signed it anyway. Right? So I got him to sign a Green Goblin issue that he drew in green ink.
Nice.
And the other one was that I got him to sign was 42, which is the first appearance of Mary Jane Watson, which he also drew, and he also kind of co-created MJ. So I got his first issue and then MJ's first issue. Like I said, and they're beat up copies. They're not, I got no plans to ever flip them. Those are mine, and they're on my wall right now. And I'm looking at them right now, and they're pretty awesome.
That's where they shall stay.
That's where, yeah. No matter where I go, they'll always be on my wall. But yeah, that's I guess I'll give a quick plug for that exhibit. And anybody that's going to be in New York City between now and August 26th, anybody who's planning on visiting anytime during that time, and if you're a Spider-Man fan, please, please, please go check it out. You will, you so rarely get a chance to see original artwork like that from back in that particular period of time, and there's so much of it all in one place, and it's really just a great experience if you're a fan of original artwork like that. So please check it out. It's the Society of Illustrators in Manhattan. And
was it pretty packed when you went in? Or this was opening weekend, you said, right?
Yeah, man, it was a gala. Like, we not only was it packed full of fans, there were there were comic book people walking around too.
Oh,
actually,
wow!
It's funny because actually Jim Salicrup was there. I didn't get to I was there as a fan, and me and my friends were there as fans. We we didn't get to hobnob with anybody. We weren't living the high life. My buddy helped himself to some hors d'oeuvres, but
well, you got it
because they were there,
That's right.
That's right. It was a hell of a time. It was
Dude.
and like I said, the exhibit's ongoing until August 26th. I've got other friends that I want to take to that, and I'm definitely going again. I'm going, and I want to go on a less crowded day so I can actually sit in front of that.
Yeah, man.
That Ditko sequence and really like
let it get all in. Just absorb everything you can.
Anytime I see original art like that, whether it's comic books or whether it's paintings or anything like that, I tend to look like, my face is like 2 inches away from whatever it is, because that's how much, that's how I've learned to study artwork and to study artists, which is fine for me, but it doesn't do any favors to anybody else who wants to see it. So.
I wish this guy would get out of my way. What's he trying to do? That's pretty cool. So yeah, I mean, that sounds like a blast. Those are things like that are what make me, wish I was near a big city so I could definitely swing by and check stuff out. Yeah, man, if anybody has the opportunity to go to it, I'd love to hear some more about it, other people's experience. And it was just straight art of Spider-Man. Was there anything else cool there that you were like, oh, this is pretty interesting? Or
they had some Spider-Man themed drinks that I didn't get a chance to partake in, but it sounded pretty good. Everybody, it was cool. Everybody was there. I was glad that it was an actual art exhibit that was open to people that I know really would really appreciated the type of art that they were showing. I'm glad everybody, I'm glad it wasn't super exclusive and it wasn't super snobby, and I think that would take away from it because you got to remember, like, these are the comics, they were for the people, they were for the kid, the kids, the younger people, the young adults, the young at heart adults. They weren't meant to be locked away for only a select few people to see them. These were books that were on the newsstands for 15 cents a copy back in the day. I think the way that they were made accessible, the way that the artwork was made accessible for fans to look at was very much in the same way that the comics were available and accessible for everybody to read back then.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, man, I can't thank you enough for coming on here and discussing this story with me. I'm glad we got to put, a little more than 2 hours. I think we're working on 2.5 here towards this and your experience over there at the exhibit as well. So, sir, I guess we'll just do general plugs since I don't have a definite date on when this is going up. I know you've got some general things to plug for sure. So please, sir, have at it.
As always, as ever, I write, draw, self-publish a comic called Soul Exodus. You can find it on my website, soulexo.com, soulexo.com. You can check it out on my Facebook page, for the comic, facebook.com/soulexo. You'd think after as many times as I've done this on your show and everybody else's, I wouldn't be stuttering so much.
It's late, man.
I'm a little bit tired. And on Twitter, at SoulExoComic. As of right now, I am confirmed for the very first time, actually. I will be at Boston Comic Con this year, this August 11th, 12th, and 13th. I will be there with copies of Soul Exodus, with copies of Blood Gun #1. I may, hopefully, even have a few original pages or a glimpse at a few original pages from something that I'm going to get started working on very soon, something completely new. One thing about the, going to the Spider-Man exhibit that I said, like, it helps to know the type of men that you have to that you have to measure up to. Gives you hope, and it really gives you incentive to kind of get up and get going and do your own thing, which is where I'm at. But yeah, at Boston Comic Con, I'll have comics. I'll also be I've been doing a lot of Sketchbook Saturday sketches lately in full color. I will have a few of those for sale in print form. I'll have some sketch covers with me, some original stuff. So if anybody is going to be at Boston Comic Con from August 11th through the 13th, check me out, say hi, drop by, buy some artwork. I'll be taking commissions as I always do.
Ladies and gentlemen, number one, thank you for joining us tonight. If you did so live, or if you're catching us later on down the road, you never know. I want to go ahead and plug number one, the Radulich and Broadcasting Network Facebook page. Go give that a like to stay up on top of some great podcasts that we have to offer. On that page, you will see pinned to the top there will be a link for represent.com/fight Radulich fight. Now, what is that? That right there should take you to the opportunity for you to purchase a t-shirt and help our patriarch, Mark Radulich, out with his battle against cancer. So give that some thought. Every shirt purchase will throw a little bit of cash his way so the main man can fight Radulich fight. So check that out. Keep an eye out for that. You can follow me at Stiznarkey on Twitter. If you'd like to do so on Facebook, Source Material does have a Facebook page. You can do so there. Also at SourceMattCast on Twitter. And hey, we're on YouTube as well. If you want to check out some past shows, we're there. There's some visual cues. If you're listening to this as an audio podcast, you can check out some of the great visual stuff we put on there that goes along with the podcast as well. I can't guarantee every episode has some good stuff. This one tonight actually had quite a bit. Probably some of the most panels and pages that I've ever shown. So I'm pretty proud of that. And by golly, I want to thank you, Benjamin J. Cologne, for coming on here again and having a good time. I hope you enjoyed yourself, man. I
always have a good time talking comics and being on your show, man.
All right.
And also fight Radulich fight. Kick cancer's ass, Mark.
Do it.
I know you can do it, man.
That's right. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this has been a presentation of Source Material, Kraven's Last Hunt. I want to wish everybody out there a great night. Have a good one.
Hi, this is Maury Moreland Morrison, here to tell you Geico has more than just great savings. Much more. Yes, while Geico could help you rack up more moolah faster than you can say metamorphosis, they've also been the fastest growing auto insurer for more than 10 years. That's more like it. Furthermore, Geico has fast and friendly claim service. That might seem like an oxymoron, but it's not. All the more reason to say no other auto insurer has more than Geico. Geico. Expect great savings and a whole lot more.
What if a nursing college cared for its students the same way nurses cared for their patients? What if the focus was on keeping students in, not weeding them out? What would happen? Something extraordinary. Join us, and together we can make a difference. Chamberlain University College of Nursing. Extraordinary care, extraordinary nurses.
Attend Chamberlain's Miramar Campus Open House July 19th at 4 p.m. For gainful employment information, visit chamberlain.edu/GEBSN.